Alright, we're now at the pump, so we're going to go ahead and work on the pump cover first. We have all the valve trains laid out. These are the large ratio boost valves from the CK kit, so we have a 472 boost and a 390 reverse boost along with the spring. And then for our pressure regulator valve, we have the land here on the inboard side ground all the way around so that we can achieve full-time line to lube. As far as the lockup valve and the two springs, there's no difference, no mods. You just install it the same way it came out. A healthy soaking at WD. So in with your PR valve. All right, make sure it goes all the way to the bottom with no issues. Oops. And I'll be honest, like for a minute, I was thinking I was dealing with a 700 R4 pump, and I was expecting the stator to be, you know, on the bottom there. Okay. So insert your reverse boost and just kind of get it started in the bore. And follow it up with your boost. Okay, the CK spring is going to be a little bit longer than the factory spring or even the Transgo spring, so you know, just kind of be aware of that. So it might be a little bit trickier to get in and fully installed. Especially if your hands are all slippery and soaked with WD-40. Like something settled into place there, you know. Okay, nice movement. I should say nice freedom of movement. That's what you want to see. Returns back to rest position once I release the spring tension. Alright, so your two springs for your lockup valve, and then the valve itself with the stem facing in. Just gonna put a little bit of WD on this valve. And I didn't specifically mention it when I had the PR valve in my hand, but you want to inspect it, make sure it's not worn out. Every once in a while I'll see one of these come in, and the two middle lands are sometimes really worn. You know, it's like they're visibly out of round, and when you see that, you obviously want to dump that valve. I mean, you could put a valve from another casting into your pump without any issues, as long as, you know, it doesn't have the same problems. You know, the main thing is you don't want a valve installed that's not going to, you know, regulate pressure as it needs to because it's too worn out to do so. Okay. That's basically it for the pump cover on these. This doesn't have one of those filters with the O-ring like the 700R. It just has the bleed off location here. The, you know, the larger check ball and spring. Just check it. I like to center it up. More force of habit than anything else. All right. Put that aside. I'm gonna shift the camera a little bit to the right, and then we'll go ahead and build up the pump body. Alright, now we're going to go through and assemble the pump body. So a couple of things real quick. I've already mic'd the slide, the rotor, as well as the vanes, and I have a couple feeler gauges along with a straight edge so that we can check our clearance. I don't always show this part of the process, but I wanted to show it here. I strongly recommend everybody do this. You want to mic all the way around each one of these lugs on your rotor. So this is a 7 vane. If it's 10, you might get in 10 spots. 13, you might get in 13 spots. And then the slide, just go all the way around. I've measured, I think, 8 or 9 different points. I only wrote down 2, but I went all the way around both just to confirm that they're both within specification and they're of the same overall height down to a half a thou of an inch. If you have a micrometer that's capable of 1/10 thou resolution, that's going to actually be even more ideal, but 1 thou is fine. You know, you can get the measurements you need. I also recommend you mic the height of the pump vanes. Now what I'm going to describe is very, 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 very rare. Okay, very rare, but every once in a great while, and if you do enough transmissions, you'll encounter this. Every once in a great while, you'll have one of these vanes too tall. Okay, this is 707 thousandths. They're all exactly the same, but if it's a thou or a thou and a half too tall, it'll bind up your rotor and slide. So, again, it's not something you lay up at night worrying about, but it's always good practice to mic everything and measure everything before you assemble, so that if there's a problem, then you know immediately what you can rule out. I even mic the pump rings, and just to be clear, I've never ever once ever had a problem with Transgo's unbreakable pump rings. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is put just the slide and the rotor in the body. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to just use a 1.5 thou feeler gauge and a 2 thou feeler gauge as kind of a go no go gauge to measure for clearance. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just lay the straight edge across the surface just like this, and I'm going to start with my 1.5 thou feeler gauge. So the clearance for these vane style pumps is going to be as follows. For your rotor, you want to be between 1 and 1.5 thou clearance between the top of the rotor surface and the deck surface on the body. For the slide, your clearance is going to be between 1 and 2 thou. Ideally, you'd have a clearance of 1 thou for both of them, and you'd be at minimum spec. But if you're at, you know, maximum spec, that's also fine. And in stock or very mild builds, you have a little bit of margin for error here. So in other words, if you're a half a thou too tall, too much feeler gauge, that's also fine. Okay. For anything high performance, high RPM, you have to be within spec, no exceptions. Alright, let me get this at an angle where you actually can see the feeler gauge. I'm going to come in from the back side instead. Okay, this is dragging just a little bit. The main thing is you want to be able to insert your feeler gauge underneath your straight edge without moving the gauge. If you move the gauge, then your feeler gauge is too thick. And I'm sorry, the straight edge. If you move the straight edge, the feeler gauge is too thick and you have to step down. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a 1 thou thick feeler gauge. The thinnest I have is 1.5 thou. Okay. Alright, so I'm scraping it. So on the slide, just the slide, it's going under, but it's dragging a little bit. For the rotor, I'm not able to get through it all. But I can move the rotor without moving the straight edge. And do this as many times as you really feel you need to. You know, multiple points, go this direction, then rotate it 90 degrees and go in the other direction. Basically, you want to cover all points of the rotor and the slide just to be confident that, you know, you're not going to have any problems once this thing goes back in. Okay, because this is really your one chance to check everything and make sure that it's good to go. And whatever you do, and this is especially true of high performance, but really true of all these vane style aluminum pumps, you know, I would never not have the body and the cover machined. I mean, I build it into the price, it's part of the deal. It's just a given, no different than, you know, the clutches, right? You would never reuse clutches in the transmission. So you would never not resurface and machine the pump assemblies, or at least the pump castings. Okay, a little bit of drag. A little bit of drag is fine, especially if you're using a 1.5 thou gauge and your spec range is between 1 and 2 thou. Okay, because it's going underneath the rotor as well, there's drag. That tells me that I need to use the 2 thou feeler gauge as kind of a go or a no-go gauge, just to make sure that I'm not outside of spec. And that's what I'll do now. Okay, a lot of drag going underneath the slide and the straight edge, but I'm moving the straight edge when I'm trying to get underneath the rotor. Okay, a lot of drag. A little, I mean, I can almost get it through before it starts to move. That must be like 1 in 9/10 thousandths or something at that location. That's just a guess, by the way. Okay, so here again we're moving it. Okay, so these are the kind of things you want to do prior to assembly. So once we have the pump fully assembled, we'll use a checking tool, which is what you see here. You can also use your torque converter. I actually have both, to confirm that the rotor spins freely, you know, within the assembly here. Okay, so, and then once that's done, then the pump's done. Alright, the assembly process is straightforward, and if you've watched my 700R4 4L60E videos where I'm assembling a pump, it's going to be no different here. Same style. So we did our seal and our bushing. This is the Sonex bushing. I also drilled out the drain back 1/4 of an inch so that we have a little bit better drain back. So that's going to be this location right here, and then this passage right here. So do that on all your 700R4s, 4L60Es, and 204Rs. I'll start with a ring, and for our slide we have our support O-ring and then the cover. So how I like to do these is just simply take the whole body and just drop it on in over the cover. Most of the time that bottom ring does not actually fall off. But of course I'm filming, so it's gonna develop a mind of its own and drop out. Actually, it's just gravity. Alright, enough of me babbling. So here we have our slide spring support and our Teflon slide spring. And then in will go our pivot pin spring and our pivot pin. And then for your priming spring, you want to get a big screwdriver. And make sure that whatever screwdriver you're going to use has a smooth blade. You don't want anything with ridges in it. Okay, so this transbuild kit is for all applications that are going to see greater than 5,500 RPM. I install that kit pretty much exclusively. I mean, you can run the other kit if you're, maybe you're using it for a heavy duty application, something like towing and hauling, where you know for a fact it's never going to see any kind of serious RPMs. But if you're doing anything, especially if it's a passenger car, if you're doing anything performance oriented, I recommend the 55 and up version of this kit. Okay, so obviously the side faces up, the lugs are offset to the rear. And it doesn't really matter which orientation you put the vanes in, as long as they go, with the long axis facing up and down. Folks will tell you that you can reuse these vanes, and I've actually done it in the past. Not had issues. You just want to make sure that you orient the wear surface against the outer diameter of the bore there. But again, these things are so cheap, there's no reason to reuse them, in my humble opinion. Okay. Alright, this is a Sunshell out of a 4T65E, I believe. I don't do front wheel drive transmissions, but I believe that's where it comes from. And then this tool I bought off eBay years and years ago. I've had it, I want to say, for at least 8 years, probably 10 years. I've been building transmissions for a little over 10 years, and as long as I can remember, I've had this. I think at the very early days I was using a hose clamp, and I think this replaced the hose clamp within 1 year of me starting to starting to rebuild these on a regular basis. Alright, I just wanted to get some stuff out of the way. Let me go get the pump cover stator. Alright, just lube up your working surfaces. Okay, so locate your 2 bolt holes that are kind of close to each other, and then locate the same 2 bolt holes on the cover. It's actually these 2 bolts right here. And then that's going to be how you want to align it, just hastily, to get the bolt started. Alright, sorry if my head got in the way. Okay, 15 foot-pounds on all 5 of these bolts. They're all the same. I got that. Got this cockeyed and sticking out like that. I swear I'm a lot less clumsy when the camera's not rolling. Believe it or not. And it's okay if you don't. But whenever the camera gets rolling, it's like I got 2 right arms, 2 left hands, and, you know, 2 left feet. And just double check. Loosen this up and make an adjustment. Okay. 13mm. And then just go every other bolt until they're all torqued. Alright, moment of truth. Take our checking tool. And that feels perfect. If you happen to have the converter and you don't have a checking tool, then obviously you can do the same thing. You just want to be very careful. It'll be good practice for when you go to install the converter onto the pump when the transmission is ready to be installed back into the vehicle, so you kind of know what it feels like. Hey, you hear that sound? That sound is the one-way clutch inside the converter, aka the stator. I'll do a separate video on converters, but in brief, if you want to understand how the stall speed is derived in a converter and how a converter works, it's really very simple. The converter does two things primarily. It multiplies torque at lower RPMs to get you up to speed, and then it fluid couples so that your engine and your transmission can spin at different speeds without destroying each other. Okay, so torque multiplication occurs first. Then once the flows, there's two different flows inside these things. There's rotary flow and vortex flow. Once those flows cancel each other out, then the converter stops with the torque multiplication. That ceases and fluid coupling is achieved. And in the old days before converter clutches, the term for that would be lockup. And whatever RPM, in terms of engine speed that occurred, that fluid coupling occurred at, that would be the converter's stall speed. Okay, now in the days with, locking converters, converter clutches and all that good stuff, that might confuse the issue when you're using that terminology. Are we talking about, a converter clutch being applied and the converter in lockup? Or are we talking about fluid coupling, mechanical fluid coupling occurring, within the converter? So anyway, that is, quick, down and dirty overview of how these things work. Okay, pump's all done. So we're basically ready to go and install it into the case. Leave the O-ring off because you want to make sure that you can check and adjust your front end play. This is the shim that came out of the unit originally. I would say there is a less than 0.1% chance, maybe less than or equal to, that'll actually work given everything we've done to this thing. But, it's as good as a place to start as any. So that's what we'll do. And then we'll adjust as we need to. You also may want to fit the pump in there before you install things like the overdrive section, the input shaft and gear train and overdrive clutch. So that if you need to, you can make adjustments there too. Alright, so that's the pump. So let's go ahead and move to the next step. Okay, we're going to begin the buildup of the overdrive section with the installation of sealing rings. So we have the old sealing rings that have to come off, and then of course we have the new ones. Two of these are the scarf cut sealing rings, so that's here and here, and they obviously require no special tools. But the third is this solid one-piece ring that has to be, maneuvered into position and then resized. So there's a special J-tool sizer that works for this. If you don't have that though, there's something else that you can use that is a lot cheaper and just as effective, if not arguably even more so. And that is using a hose clamp with a piece of rubber that you would cut out from a rubber sheet kit that's readily available on Amazon. So I'll put a link in the description to the sheets, but basically all you're really doing is taking whatever size hose clamp, cutting length of it, section of it that fits inside just like this, and you want to have the two ends of the piece of rubber 180 degrees or so out from the screwing mechanism, because you don't want to risk having this coming into contact between the gaps of the ends there with the sealing ring, so it might ruin it. This technique can be used for any kind of one-piece Teflon ring. You can resize rings of whatever diameter for whatever part, for whatever transmission, as long as you have a suitable sized hose clamp based on what you're trying to do. So I want to say this is $10 or $11 for three. There's three squares, rubber sheets. There's two of them, and then there's a third one inside. So like I said, 11 bucks, 11 maybe 12 bucks out the door if you have sales tax or whatever, somewhere in that neighborhood. But Obviously a lot cheaper than the J tool and a lot more readily available. Alright, let's go ahead and take the sealing rings off. So for the scarf cut rings, you want to pre-wind those before installation and then use some of the green assembly lube to hold them in place. And then for the one-piece Teflon sealing ring, you just cut it off however, you know, whichever method you want to use. I can't remember what manual I was reading, and I don't even know if it was for this transmission, but there was some guidance somewhere that said that if this sealing ring or a sealing ring that, you know, similar to this isn't obviously damaged, like what I'm doing here to it, isn't obviously damaged or cut, the guidance was to just leave it on, just don't change it. Again, forgive me, I don't know if it was this transmission or not. I'll annotate the video after looking at the ATSG manual again to see if it's anywhere in there, but this one's stubborn. But basically, the idea is that if it's not worn, don't worry about replacing it because chances are you don't have the necessary sizing tool to resize it. Well, nowadays you have those tools or improvisational methods, so you know you don't have to worry about reusing this kind of stuff if you don't have to. Okay, there is a expander tool, J tool, that comes over and allows you to expand the sealing ring. Okay, but again, you don't really need it. What you need to do is just simply be careful. Okay, so I'm just using a blunt 45-degree angle pick, you know, the same pick you've seen me use to install a variety of these things, and you just want to very, very carefully expand it over the groove until you can get it installed. Okay, you can pinch it a little bit to get the pick in between, and then just go around and work it over. I mean, again, nothing about this is a race. Just take your time. You know, if you're not sure, just back off and start again. Main thing is you don't want to twist it like I just did. So if it's twisted, just kind of roll it around and back it off a little bit and untwist it. And now we'll go ahead and open up our little sizing tool here. Just make sure you got it fully engaged all the way around. I have a screwdriver, but I think this takes a 5/16 socket too, so. And I got a little cockeyed, so you want to check that. You want to make sure it's level. Otherwise it might not size exactly as it should. You don't need to be super tight with it either. Okay, leave it on there for like 10 seconds. And then we'll take it off and check it. Okay, looks like we have a little bit of room to work. A little bit more progress we need to make. Okay, if you're not certain about this part of the process, and you know, it may be a good idea to have another one of these Teflon rings. You know, like I said, it's another, you know, yet another area in this transmission where you want to have some spares, if at all possible. Alright, we've had it on for a couple minutes. So what we'll do is bring the pump over. And we'll check it. Looks like it still has a little bit of ways to go. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Alright, so this is how things will stack up. If I can get the pump to stay still, that is. Okay, so you're going to have your scarf cut sealing ring way at the top. It's going to correspond to this groove here. Then you're going to have your selective thrust washer, that this 3-tab deal. Assuming I can get it to go on. And then you're going to have your coast clutch drum. Okay. Alright, so I assembled the pump previous to the coast clutch and overdrive assembly, so we're going to put together the rest of the overdrive unit, and then while I'm doing that, I'm going to just leave the input shaft in the stator so it can resize. Alright, while the input shaft is sitting in the pump, we can go ahead and assemble the rest of the overdrive unit. So, start with the coast clutch drum and piston. So we installed new bushing. Check out the bushing video if you haven't seen it already. So there's actually two of them. There's a removal and a reinstallation video. I'll take you through step by step on taking out all the bushings and then installing new ones. Alright. So we'll remove the old lip seals. Okay, the lip seals for the coast clutch drum are, you know, it's relatively a low risk deal in terms of getting them confused with, you know, other lip seals that go elsewhere. So just install them like you normally would, lip facing down. Just check all the way around. And I'm going to lube them up. Alright, a little bit of downward pressure, just like any other piston. Okay, if you're getting hung up somewhere, just figure out where and deal with it. Looks like the inner lip seal is getting hung up down here on the sealing journal. All right, there we go. All right, now your kind of wavy style return spring assembly and your spring retainer. All right, now these can be a little bit tricky on the overdrive clutch because, as you can see, it doesn't want to rest in here symmetrically. I mean, you could press it all the way down, but you know, just letting it sit there, you know, I mean, it's like a balancing act. In fact, I'm surprised it's actually doing that. Okay, your next step is to install your overdrive roller clutch. So what you want to do is grab your race, your cam element, and carefully install the roller assembly onto the cam. Then drop them both onto the splines on the drum. Alright, grab your snap ring. Just press down and then install it. Just make sure it's in all the way. Go around with a screwdriver. Just double check. All right. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and install our clutch pack. So we got 2 frictions, 2 flat steels, and a backing plate. So we'll install the 2 frictions and the 2 steels. If they want to cooperate, that is. Alright, and if you like, you can install your sun gear and your planet at this point. So the sun gear is going to have a set of splines that are beveled on one side, and then a set that's, you know, flush all the way up. Now, it doesn't really matter which way it goes, but I like to install the beveled splines toward the planet, and that's so that, well, I guess it's really more so a habit than anything else, not any particular, you know, reason beyond that. Okay, so it's just like this. From what I understand, this was actually a production line mechanism or assembly line mechanism, and the bevel here was machined to enable tooling on the assembly line to grab this thing as it was making its way down the line. That is my understanding. I don't know, you know, obviously I wasn't there. I didn't play a part in manufacturing these things. So go ahead and install your sun gear, and then you're just going to have to mesh and then engage your roller assembly. It's going to rotate counterclockwise and lock clockwise. Okay. And then for your backing plate, just like on a 4L80E 204R coast clutch drum, is going to have an up stamped into the, you know, U-facing side of the plate. And then I pointed this out elsewhere, but notice the ends of the snap ring, they're square. So that's how you can readily tell the difference between this one and the ones that go into the forward and direct clutch drums. Alright, so that's that for that, and then at this point we're ready to take that input shaft out of the pump and install it into the coast clutch / overdrive hub assembly. Alright, let me go get my snap ring pliers for that. So the first thing we need to do is install the scarf cut rings. So pre-wind. Okay, see, this is the wrong way to do it. See how they're arranged? Alright, now it's the correct way. And you can put a little lube on the other one too if you want. Alright, we're going to go ahead and install our snap ring. Just got to get it at an angle where I can actually physically do it. Alright, and then go ahead and lube up the bore your stator. Grab my selective washer. Like I said, the likelihood of this washer actually giving us the end play that we need is basically near zero. I don't want to say it's zero, but it's pretty damn close. And I only say that because this is what came out of the unit, and you know, we've made so many changes. Although I will say that front end play is independent of the other two you know, points of travel. So the rear gear train and the two drums have nothing to do with the front end play between the overdrive drum and the pump. Okay. So that intermediate shaft does not thrust against, you know, this part of the planet or the overdrive assembly. I want to see if I can do this in a way that you can actually see what I'm doing. Okay. My battery died, I apologize, but what I was about to say, which you didn't hear, but you'll hear it now, is that we're going to move the assembly with the pump and the overdrive section to somewhere, ended up here on the foot press, so that we can measure the travel that the input shaft's going to make between the, you know, surface of the planet here and the snap ring. Because when we go to measure front end play, we have to net this out. So this is one more area in the transmission you have to check, and I even totally spaced on this when I did my intro, but now you'll hear about it. So this is a different dial indicator. I was fishing around in my drawer and I came upon it. It's a Kent Moore tool. It's I'll give you the J number. It has a J number. I'm not sure what it is. It's part of this whole deal here. So what you're going to do is set it up like you have it there, or whatever dial indicator. Make sure your plunger is good and zeroed. And then you're going to push up on the input shaft in this direction, you know, toward you. And what you want to do is measure that travel. All right, looks like it's about 42 thousandths. Let's try it again. And 42 thousandths. like I'm seeing 43 thousandths. Oh, I just moved it. Great. $42 or $43,000, somewhere in there. But you want to record that number so that when you go and you measure your front end play, you know to net this out, because it has to be net of this travel of the input shaft between the snap ring and the surface of the overdrive planet. Okay, grab your overdrive ring gear. I'm going to put a little bit of green assembly lube you can. Alright, have your bearing in this orientation, the inner half of it facing up, facing you. And then just spin it, make sure that there's nothing weird going on, no binds in the case, nothing hanging up anywhere, you know, all the usual kind of checks you would normally do when it comes to putting stuff into the case one after the other. So, you know, you just want to check periodically. That's basically it. Alright, your next step is to grab your overdrive piston. Now, we machined 80 thousandths off this thing. It's pretty standard fare for 204R regardless of application. It's preferred that you stick an additional friction disc in between those two steels for stock or mild builds. For anything beyond that, it's mandatory, at least in my humble opinion. I mean, you can certainly disagree with that if you'd like, but I wouldn't take chances. Okay, the little indexing tab here obviously goes to the cutout in the case. I mean, you can't really install it in any other direction or orientation. Alright, here's your overdrive return spring assembly and your snap ring. Get it in position, and then we'll show you the final special tool that you're going to be using, and that is the clutch spring compressor that will allow you to install the snap ring. So it's going to be a Kentmore tool. It's actually a two-parter. So you're going to have the compressor itself. It's going to be J29334-1. Okay, so just make sure that you have unobstructed access to that, the two ends of the snap ring. Other than that, just put it in however. And then you have J29334-2. You want to put the bridge at roughly the 830 and 230 positions. I don't think this thing came with any bolts, so I've been using these. Just a nut, a couple of washers, and a bolt that works with the pump to case threads. I mean, that's basically it. So 13 millimeter on these bolts and the forcing screw. Okay, you don't have to get hyper aggressive with this thing. Just make sure it doesn't move. Crank it down until you have full exposure to snap ring groove. And then install your snap ring. This snap ring is fairly straightforward, assuming you have a means, you know, to compress the spring. Just double check everything. Alright, I'm gonna release tension and see where we're at. Just kind of making a check all around. Alright, appears to be okay. So now go ahead and install your overdrive clutch. So you're going to have two sets of lugs. They're going to be at the 10 and the 2 position. So there's your bottom steel, clutch. And these are Alto steels. I think I said in the intro I was using all Rebestis or all Borg Warner. I mean, it's been a couple of days, I can't remember. Can't remember what I had for breakfast. Okay, again, same orientation. Ends indexed at the 180 relative to your parking lug and parking rod area. Alright, so this snap ring is orientation agnostic otherwise. Alright, so what we want to do here is we want to make sure that this return spring and the snap ring there are truly installed. So once we confirm that, then I'll go ahead and set up the dial indicator, measure my clutch clearance, then I'm going to take this pack out, we'll install the overdrive assembly, and then we will install the pack back in, and at that point we'll install that that spacer, and then we'll be ready for the pump. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and check clearance in the overdrive clutch pack, and all we're really doing here is, well, I guess two things. One, we're doing an air check if we haven't done it independent of this. But two, all we're doing is making sure that there's nothing unusual going on. Okay, this pack is an unregulated pack when it comes to clearance, at least unregulated from the factory. Yes, you can adjust the clearance, but it involves machine work. So we did a little bit of that machine work by removing the 80 thou off the piston so that we can fit that extra friction in there. Generally speaking, you'll see clearance in this pack between 50 and 70 thousandths. But like I said, that is just simply, case by case. It's not a controlled specification. Okay, so we'll put air in the overdrive feed location. Just one good, firm, strong apply. Alright, I'm happy with that. 62, 63 thou, that's perfectly fine. Okay, I'm going to take everything out now, at least as far as the clutch pack is concerned. we'll go ahead and put the overdrive assembly in, put the clutch pack in, that little spacer thing, and then we'll get ready to do a preliminary end plate check for the pump. Alright, in with the overdrive section and input shaft. Okay, remember our 43 thousandths that we need to account for. And then just go ahead and install your overdrive frictions and seals for the final time. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this this end counterclockwise so that this fills the rest of that groove there to this lug. Alright, I think that's good. When you have a real big friction like this, the adage of 10 thou per friction doesn't really apply. It's more like 20 thou, 15 to 20 thou per friction, just FYI. Alright, now it's time for our spacer. So I have little indexing marks here I made with a punch on this assembly, just so I wouldn't be fumbling around trying to figure out exactly how it went back in. And then I'm going to put the case gasket in. Everything is going to be dry for the time being because I want to just do a preliminary end plate check to see where we're at before I, make everything all nasty with the lube and put the O-ring in and install everything for the final time. Alright, all your feed passages, you want them at the 6 o'clock position. Just index based on the 2 bolt hole locations that are close to each other at the 3 o'clock. Okay. And here's what I'm going to recommend. You take 3 bolts without any seals on them and install them first and then tap this thing in. In fact, I'll put a 4th. So 4 bolts, no seals. Okay, because those seals, if they get, once you torque everything down, they're gonna crush and you're basically done. You're still probably going to have to tap this thing in. It's not going to just drop in. The machining on these things isn't nearly as precise as with later model transmissions, like 4L60Es, especially the ones that have the wedge seal, 4 and up. And they will just drop right in, gravity alone. But you'll know it when you hit bottom. have a nice flat report. Run them down on an impact, but if they're, you know, kind of fighting you a little bit, just use a ratchet. You don't want to strip anything out at this point. Or you can use a speed wrench also. It's a little quicker. Alright, and before you run any bolts down, just do a perimeter check. Make sure that you're absolutely seated. Look at the ledge down here where the pump and the case meet. Make sure there's no gap. Alright, if there's a gap, then you're not all the way seated and you could potentially strip your threads out on the case. Then you got to do helicoil, and that's a pain because to do it, you know, risk-free, you got to evacuate the case at that point. Alright, I'm making vice grips. There is another special tool that Kenmore makes to do end plate checks on transmissions that have these kind of small diameter pilots. I'll show it to you in a second. I never use it because I just find the vice grips are more convenient. Okay, make sure you can do this too. I can't go in a full circuit, but you know, go as wide as you can. Just make sure that everything spins without any major issues. And if you listen real carefully, you'll hear two different sets of parts moving and then coming to a rest. Okay, that washer may be a little tight, so we're going to measure what we have. End plate may be a little tight right now. Because remember, we haven't torqued anything down. When you torque to spec, between 15 and 20 foot-pounds, you're going to actually pick up, or I should say, you're actually going to reduce the travel by between 1 and 3 thousandths. That's been my personal experience. 1 and 3 thousandths of crush that paper composite gasket is going to, you know, is going to give you. All right, set up a dial indicator. And then I'll move the camera so that you can see what's going on. Now we get the camera oriented, so let's see where we're at. It's like 44.5 thou gross. That's 45 right on the nose. So 45 thou. Recall we were at 42 or 43 thou on that snap ring travel, so we have to net that out. That leaves us 2 thousandths, maybe 3 thousandths if you really want to fudge the numbers, but either way it's too tight. The spec for here that we're trying to manage to is 4 to 25 thousandths. So gotta dig into the bin and see if we can find one level below the washer that we're using now in terms of thickness. And preferably I would like to be somewhere between 4 and 15 thousandths. I like to run these transmissions a little bit tighter, but if we're within spec and, I've exhausted all my options with respect to these thrust washers, then that's kind of where we're at. So let me get the pump back out. We'll fish through the drawer, look for a shim or a washer rather that'll work, and we'll try it again. And at this point, I'm going to just install the pump for the final time. So remember, we're probably going to also take up 2 to maybe 3 thousandths worth of slack in the gasket once we torque everything up. So I really need to thin out my travel, or I should say my spacer, between 8 and 12 thousandths. So I want to take 8 and 12 thousandths off, and then that'll get me where I want to be. All right. So let's measure this washer and then see what we need to do and what we can find in this bin that will work. So looking for something that's in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 thousandths thinner, just to be on the safe side, because this is going to be what I hope the second and final time that I go back in with the pump. So I'm going to lube everything up. I'm going to basically prep it for install and install it. And just to be clear, you may have a slight, like an infinitesimally small and slight influence on the end play as a result of assembly lube being put to hold this, this thrust washer in place. But it's going to be at most a thou, 2 tops. There could be material. I mean, it really depends on where you're at, but it's just something to be aware of. I would say the gasket being crushed once you torque it is going to have a greater influence on the delta of your end play than a little bit of assembly lube here. All right, so let's go ahead and measure. Looks like 195 thousandths. $190 thousandths. $190. It's like 190. So looks like might have been user error on that first measurement. So we need something 178, 182. So this is a, see if these are coded or not. Yes, they are. This is a number 5 washer. Right there. All right, this is 85 thousandths. I'm just going to write the thicknesses while I'm at it. So 180 would be nice. That's exactly the same as the other one. So it looks like we may have found a winner, 180. Alright. So we have 180 plus 1 to 2 thousandths less, I guess 1 to 2, maybe 3 thousandths worth of crush. So this should give us a net end play figure between 8 and 12 thousandths. That's going to be my forecast. Alright, we'll take you back over to the case and then we'll install this thing for the final time and then do a final in-play check, or what I hope is a final in-play check. Okay, lube up the bore, nice and good. Actually, shouldn't have done that. I don't want to put a whole bunch of assembly lube on that surface because, like I said, that could influence the end play readings. So, you know, where I'm looking like I'm tighter than I am and I have to do a bunch of extra unnecessary work because I think I have to change the spacer out again. Alright, then lube up your pump O-ring. In my case, I need to put it on. Alright, with the pump O-ring, you want that red stripe facing you. Just make sure it's not twisted in the groove. So installing a 180 thousandths thick shim, or washer rather. Shim, washer, spacer, whatever you want to call it. I'm always saying that because I want to remind myself what I'm needing or what I'm going to need to replace. So anytime you consume a selective and you're building 204Rs, you know, you use it in a build, always replace it. Alright, pump bolts. Make sure they're all started. All right, good. Okay, not all of them are going to be finger loose, so, but on this transmission, I'll be honest, I don't recommend using an impact to zip bolts down on the pump. Some of the housings can be just, you know, I don't know if I want to say warped or even tweaked, but temperamental. And so you want to make sure that you're not being overly aggressive and potentially could strip a set of threads out on any of these locations. That would suck. And it was right in your face. choice in camera angle is probably not the best. I'm not going to win an Oscar anytime soon for cinematography, or anything else for that matter. Alright, I'm going to have to move the camera so I can get in here with the torque wrench. Alright, we're going to go 15 foot-pounds. And all I'm doing is sneaking up on them, at the moment anyway. So crisscross pattern. The book does not have any kind of torque sequence, you know, anything like that. Just, I think the general guidance that the ATSG manual gives you, if any, is just go in a crisscross pattern and, you know, don't be stupid about it. They may not use those exact words, but it's the general idea. Alright, stick a set of vice grips on it real quick just to see that you can move the shaft. Make sure it's not being bound up or, you know, caught up, blocked from moving. So I'm going to need to change out my gloves. So let me do that and we'll set up the dial indicator, reposition the camera, and then take a final reading. Alright, let's see where we're at. Looks like 52. So there is the travel between the snap ring and the surface of the planet, and then there is the real end play. So 7 thousandths, that's perfect, that's perfectly fine. Alright, so now with the pump fully installed, at some point you just want to make sure you put on your torque converter clutch O-ring. I promised I'd show you that other specialty tool that I was talking about that does basically the same thing as this as these set of vice grips. So here's a tool. It's a Kenmore J24773-1, or excuse me, -A. That's an A, not a 1. And it's used in conjunction with the portion that actually engages the O-ring groove, and that's J34725. The light is getting weird in here. It's later in the afternoon and the sun is about to just literally shine right into the shop, so I'm actually having trouble seeing you know, looking at this area in here on the viewer screen. There's like light bouncing off of it. A lot of glare. All right, so the case is fully assembled. Now we're gonna just finish up the transmission. We'll do a case air check. I will talk through check ball locations. We'll have to torque up those 2 center support bolts. And then the 3-4 accumulator, the spacer plate, the 1-2 accumulator and valve body. We're going to be installing the internal external TCC lockup kit from TCI. So we have to install the internal portion of that onto the transmission. We got to do the parking linkage. And at that point, once all that stuff is on, we're basically done. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail as to why, behind the statement I'm about to make. But when I give these back to the customer, I don't actually install the pan gasket. I don't install the pan and the 4 bolts. Okay, so go ahead and continue to final assembly, and you'll learn why if you don't already know, and you'll get to see everything else that I just went over in step-by-step procedural detail.